We find ourselves at a very special Sunday. Some of you may not be aware this last week was Lutheran Schools Week, and so our day school, it was a fun week of kind of getting out of the norm. And we got to have like special dress-up days, and at the end of the day, we'd have these competition called the Storm Olympics. This is further proof that Pastor Miles and I are living the dream. We got to have Jammy Day, and I got to dress up as Spider-Man on Wednesday. So this is a true joy. And in addition to our school, my mom's a principal at a school. I know there are other Lutheran schools that were celebrating Christian education, and I think it's important for me to point that out. We had the Westland kids up here. Once again, showing great value in Christian education. And I would point out as well that even if, I know that we have many families whose kids are not in our day school, but you value Christian education. That's a core value of our church. And one of the greatest places where kids receive a Christian education is at home. And then, of course, on Sunday, and then, yes, in other ways, day school, small groups, there's so many different ways. Christian education is incredibly important. We value it. And so I'm going to give you a quiz as a result. See how you're doing. I'm going to test you. Let's see how you do. 4 questions. The 12 tribes of Israel were descendants of the 12 sons of, don't say Israel, okay? That's kind of cheating. What was Israel's original name? Jacob. 1 for 1, right? Good. You're making me nervous. Second question. What is the 8th commandment? Now, some of you may realize that there are different versions of the 10 Commandments, so I'm the teacher up here standing and saying, this is the right answer, because I know I teach 7th grade, and they're always trying to, the religion class, and always trying to say, like, will this work? There's one answer here. You got to give me the Lutheran version of the 10 Commandments found in the Martin Luther Small Catechism, and everybody in this room knows what that is. So, what is the 8th commandment? You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. 2 for 2, right? You're not sounding confident. Why do Christians traditionally worship on Sunday? Because Jesus rose from the dead on Sundays, right? Jesus rose from the dead on Sunday. 3 for 3. Good work. I love the confidence. I can feel like washing over me here. Last question. This is from the Bible. You get the blank, you get a point. You get another point for the book of the Bible. You get another point after that if you can get the chapter. Another point after that, you get the verse. We are more than conquerors through him who loved us. From Romans chapter 8, verse 37. How many of you feel like this? How many of you feel like this? Look at me. I do. It's 37. Those people over there, they don't. Do you see what I just did? I use words like, we all know, and I'm sure. Do you see? What I did was I just divvied up the room, marginalized some, lifted some up, and we're kind of at different levels here now. Some are kind of standing on a hill. Some maybe kind of halfway up the hill. Maybe some of you feel like you're on the bottom. And we all realize, I think, because we've all gone through school, that there's testing, that there's quizzes, there are right answers, there's truth. But it's dangerous sometimes. Can it be when we sometimes compare ourselves to other people, and you can sometimes feel like you're doing better and some maybe not doing as well? I'd like to take a look at, this is John chapter 2. This is right before our reading today. And we're going to identify why what we just did there could be problematic. Now, when Jesus was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them. So, okay, people saw all the things he was doing, amazing signs. They believed in his name, but Jesus looked at them and he didn't see pure belief. They weren't looking at Jesus seeing Savior. I need him, okay? And Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them because he knew all people and needed no one to bear witness about man, for he himself knew what was in man. You see, Jesus, people were saying, I believe in Jesus, but he knew what's in every human being's heart. And what's that? Sin. Sin. We all have a disease called sin. And because we all have that disease, there are many different symptoms that we exhibit in our lives. And that's something that we need to acknowledge today, and I'm going to take a look at a very particular symptom that our reading today draws out. Jesus has an interaction with a man named Nicodemus. And through this interaction with Nicodemus, we hear this very particular symptom of sin kind of being highlighted. Here's the problem. We look down on others. We have a nasty habit because of our sin to look down on others. And that has a huge impact in our lives and on our relationships and how we see other people. Let me share a little bit about Nicodemus. Nicodemus approached Jesus, we're told, in the middle of the night. This was kind of a common practice for teachers, for rabbis to talk when it's dark. And Nicodemus approached Jesus, and this is something you should know about Nicodemus, okay? Just a few things. He was a member of the Sanhedrin. You're like, well, what does that mean? The Sanhedrin was the religious leadership. They were important people, elite. Not everybody could be on the Sanhedrin. If you were in the Jewish community, you looked at those people, and those are the important people. Because Nicodemus was a member of the Sanhedrin, he also was very well educated. He was smart. He knew his Bible. He could have answered all the questions. And not everybody got an education. See, so once again, it kind of set Nicodemus apart. And thirdly, Nicodemus had money. And we get that from other parts of scriptures. We get the sense that Nicodemus was rather wealthy. And so here's this important, smart, wealthy man comes up to Jesus and he says, Jesus, we've heard great things about you. We, being those elites, the Sanhedrin, we've heard good things about you, and you're performing amazing miracles, and the wisdom, it's clear it comes from God. And he even calls him rabbi. Do you see what's happening here? Nicodemus is standing on his hill, looking down at the world, and he sees Jesus. And he comes up to him, and you know what he says? He's basically saying, you're on my level. And he would expect Jesus to look at him and say, oh, thank you. Which Jesus, of course, says. Jesus looks at him, and he says, you must be born again. We're going to unpack those words a little bit later. But first, just recognize that Jesus is not saying thank you, but instead looking at him and saying, you must be born again. What he's doing is he's looking at Nicodemus and he's saying, you think you're so much better than everybody else. You're a sinner just like everyone. And you don't see that. See, the problem with Nicodemus was he couldn't see. Because he was so busy building himself up and looking down at everybody else, he couldn't see how sin was at work in his own life. And what this led to was a number of things. First of all, it led him to build his life on a sense of self-satisfaction. In other words, where was Nicodemus' hope? In him, in himself, in me. In my ability to do all things right, to take care of things. And his assumption was because I'm a good person and I do all the things that everybody would want me to do, that God would want me to do right, naturally I'm in. Do we do that? Do we sometimes rest in our own self-satisfaction? When I ask you how you're doing, you give me your resume. My house is, got a nice house. I make plenty of money. My family's doing well. My relationships are okay. Work is pretty good. You know, we give our resumes of all the things that we do and all of our accomplishments. And that's the thing we kind of rest in. And so the thing that takes priority is being satisfied with me, because ultimately I believe in Jesus, but my hope is here. Not all of us might fit into that category, though. I think for others, we may not find ourselves constantly resting in self-satisfaction. We actually find ourselves seeking self-satisfaction. I heard a comment earlier this week. This person said, if I didn't have this struggle, I believe I'd be a better Christian. You don't have to know what the struggle was. The whole point, the translation, if I didn't have this struggle, my relationship with God would be better. And I heard that, and I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure that's how it works? What you find out with Nicodemus is if we're striving to be Nicodemus, Jesus is looking at us saying, you must be born again. And that's what we're striving for, to be able to stand on a hill and say, I don't have problems like other people. So self-satisfaction was one danger. Seeking hope in myself. And the more and more that we seek hope in ourselves, the less and less we look to God and understand how God truly is our ultimate hope. And what that does, that leads us ultimately to isolation. Should switch the words around there. It should be isolation from God and others, because I think that's how it flows. The more and more we find ourselves looking for hope inside ourselves, the more and more we get isolated from God, and the more we isolate ourselves from other people. I mean, this is exactly what Nicodemus did. He had status. I'm important. I'm smart. I have money. And immediately what that did was that separated him from other people. And as a Pharisee, they had a practice of not eating with sinners, not being next to those people. They separated themselves from other people because I'm so much better. We have our own versions of this. We do, if we're honest. What does separation look like in our homes? We're so busy trying to satisfy ourselves, looking for hope in here. What do? Why are you telling me to take out the trash? I got other things to do. Slam. All you do is you want me to do other things. All you do is you have expectations on me. We hear this in our relationships, and we go our separate ways. We stick our faces in our phones. We sit in different rooms. We never interact with one another. We never turn toward each other. We're always busy turning away from each other because I'm so busy trying to satisfy myself that I'd rather be isolated and alone. And then we come to church, and what do? The temptation is to say, this is a place where I see my friends, the people that I know. And it becomes kind of a routine, and we do it kind of when we are able to, but we, in reality, kind of isolate ourselves here. In Bible study, we sit next to the same people. It's kind of a lunchroom mentality. I don't know if that's how it is. I get the sense it's kind of like that still in high school today. When I was a kid, I sat next to the athletes because those are the people I was comfortable with. Those are my friends. I never, not once, in all my 4 years in high school, sat at any other table. Why? Because it was comfortable, and I liked my isolation. There were people in my class I never got to know because, you know what, I was so much different than them. If I were honest, I thought I was in some ways better. Do you know that because of our own sense of self-isolation, looking for hope inside ourselves, and then isolating ourselves and kind of working on our own little palace and our own little corner, whatever that might look like, we have no idea what's going on outside our door? Did you know this? One fact. Did you know this? As wealthy as Livingston County is, we do not have a homeless shelter. If you, for example, find yourself in a difficult position, say you find yourself in jail, you're coming out, you don't have family, you don't have money, but you want to get better, you want a chance to start over, where do you go? That's the answer. There's a homeless shelter in Ann Arbor. Do you know how you get into the homeless shelter in Ann Arbor? By showing them that your last place of residence was Washtenaw County. Do you know why they do that? Because it's in such high demand. If I shut my door and pretend nothing's going on out there, it'll take care of itself. While we are busy isolating ourselves and complaining about all the things going on in the wider culture around us, we have things right outside our door that we're not mindful of. And so Jesus looks at us. And he says, next slide, if I can get it, we're stuck. You must be born again. He says, you must be born again. I'll keep going. So Jesus looked at Nicodemus. He looks at us. He says, you must be born again. And this is a way for you to think about it. The work in childbirth is the mother, correct? When you were born and when I was born, how much work did we do? Nothing. Life was free. It was a gift. Nicodemus heard this, and his immediate reaction is, well, I'm old. How can I be born again? See, he wasn't realizing that his deepest need was spiritual. He was busy thinking physically, and Jesus is like, you don't get it. You don't get it. And you're not going to get it until you see me high and lifted up. Until you see me high and lifted up, you're not going to understand. And this is where we get to, you saw in the video that well-known passage in the Bible, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son, this is verse 3:17, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. While we're busy condemning one another, looking down on one another, Jesus looks at us and dies for us because he doesn't want to condemn us, he wants to save us. And this is what you discover. The problem is we're looking down on other people. And as a result, we don't look for hope in God. We separate ourselves from other people. But all the while, this is what God's calling us to do. Instead of looking down on others, he's calling us to look up at Jesus. He's calling us to look up at Jesus. That's the solution. And this is what we discover. When we look up at Jesus, we realize that Jesus is the only one that truly satisfies us. Only Jesus satisfies us. How many of you feel fully satisfied right now? When you go to work, you complete the work, right? And there's nothing left to do tomorrow. As a parent, I got my kids up, I sent them to school. Done! We are never done. We are never satisfied. There's always more. Our kids graduate, and what's next? They get a job. What's next? We're always looking for more. We're never fully satisfied. Jesus is the only one that looks at every single one of us and says, it is finished. Who are you? As the children sang up here, we are children of God, bought by the blood of the Son. Only Jesus satisfies. Only Jesus satisfies. So we're busy trying to rest in our own self-satisfaction. The reality is we will never be able to do that. We can only fully rest in the satisfaction Jesus offers us. What about the other side? What if I'm seeking self-satisfaction? What if I look at my life and I'm not satisfied right now? If only I didn't have this problem, I'd be a better Christian. There's irony in that statement. If you've ever heard 2 Corinthians 12:9, Jesus says, my power is made perfect in our weakness. My thought process as I'm hearing this is, if you didn't have this problem, if you didn't have this struggle, would you be asking about God right now? Would you be asking about Jesus? I run into couples who are struggling in relationships. I run into people with all sorts of problems, and when it's really bad, I find people look at me and it's like I'm the only person going through this, and I'm thinking, first of all, well, I'm certainly not perfect. Who am I to be talking to you about what you should be doing? What I can tell you is when you're struggling through the gunk of life, in your weakness, that's when you see the power of the cross. That's when you cry out to God. That's when you find yourselves on your knees, not looking down at others, but looking up at Jesus. And when we recognize that only Jesus satisfies us, that's when we can recognize, next slide, dang it. Next slide. Jesus calls us out of isolation and into community. Technical problems. So Jesus is the only one that satisfies us. He is our hope. And as our relationship with God grows, as we understand how he impacts our hearts and molds us and transforms us, he sends us out into the community. And when we're sitting at home and we're sitting in isolation, we're annoyed with brother or sister or our spouse or anybody, our children, what we can do is we can look at everybody in our house and we can say, you know what? They have the same disease I do. What do you know? It's called sin. It just looks a little different for them. But do you see how that unites us? And guess what? We all have that same cure offered to us freely, Jesus. What would it be like if we came to worship, came to church, and instead of the lunchroom mentality, we looked around and we said, I'm not alone. Look at all these sinners, just like me. And they look different. But we all recognize that there's one hope, and it's not here. What would happen if instead of marginalizing those out there, we recognize that those people too, those people who are going through some hard times, and yes, even the people we look out at and we feel them looking down their noses at us, those people too have that same disease. And perhaps we might use their weakness as an opportunity to share Jesus, or maybe we could simply love them. Thank you. What is Christian education all about? I found myself thinking about that often this week. Had a lot of kids up here. Christian education is important for us, isn't it? It's a value. And what I love about this is not only our own children up here, but you also saw students from another Christian school, people that value Christian education. I know in talking to you, whether you're, like I said, whether your kids are in a day school or not, you value Christian education. You value sharing Jesus with your kids, and you want them to have the right answers, but is Christian education all about the right answers? It's about looking up. Instead of looking down at others, it's about looking up and then looking out. As we learn to look up, may God help us look out, see the sin in other people's lives, but also see the common cure we all need. For Jesus' sake, amen.